Hello from the Hashknife. Our last video, we talked about Elsa and kind of her special circumstance and how we're going to butcher her this year after 20 months of living. I also have Tuesday, which will be the dry heifer that our family personally consumes. So I'm going to share those two special circumstances with you today and kind of explain what's going on. After nearly 60 days of feeding these animals, you'll see that they're already kind of coming to me. We'll start physically. You can see she's got her ears kind of cropped off, and that's not because they were cut or anything like that. It's simply because they quite literally froze off from frostbite. You can see that there. And then her left hoof here is actually pretty badly deformed. And you can see that right there compared to the others, especially the other hind. And she limps because we believe she has some nerve damage, muscle damage from being frozen so bad. And then of course, again, physically, the third piece you'll see here is her face. When she looks at me, it's actually been kind of frozen off. There it is. You can see the very front here. It's kind of open nostriled compared to these guys. Pretty significant difference of noses when you look at that. And then finally, when you look at her size compared to them, they're pretty well built. Frankly, they're pretty fine specimens in a way. And then there's her. That size difference, when you look at the meat and everything, that's a pretty strong indicator as to why we're making her into burger and not into steaks or anything else. Talked about the physicality, the hoof, the frostbite, the nose loss, and then of course her size, and there's a good size differential for you. Despite the size difference, we've also noticed kind of a cognitive thing. Sometimes when she makes decisions, it kind of seems like she's just not quite all there. And she makes, even though cows are not super intelligent creatures, it's like she kind of makes somewhat of just not completely thought out decisions. It's kind of odd. She's kind of slow in thinking, slow in making a decision. And it almost makes us wonder if some of that is the cold injury related. The other piece to that is there's underlying issues that we get concerned of. And that's why we're going to make her into burger and not necessarily steak. And it's probably attributing to her size is there's a raspiness sometimes when she's eating to her breathing. And it makes you wonder if there was any sort of freezing or issues to her lungs when she was born. And also, partly, again with the size, is can she really digest food as well? Did the cold influence her digestive system? And is that why she can't gain weight as easily as these guys? She has gained a little bit of weight with this excess surplus of food, but has it really helped her? Not really. And so between the physicalities, maybe some of that lung issue and cognitive decline because of the frozen nature of her entrance into this world, kind of makes you wonder what other things were there in terms of the cold. And again, we did come to the conclusion later on that maybe this was one that we should have just let fall asleep and pass into the next world, but we didn't. We tried to save her, tried to do the right thing, and sometimes you look at yourself and was doing the right thing really the right thing. And this is a good example of that, so it's a good lesson learned. One last thing I'll add about Elsa. Of all the atrocities that happened during the World War II time frame, in direct relation to the Holocaust and what the Nazis did to 6 million people, one of the small silver linings out of all those things, if you can call it that, is that some of the studies that were provided in terms of experiments on hypothermia and how people interacted with cold, it did help in kind of identifying some things to look at when my parents came across her. She was quite literally in a snowbank frozen, and my dad said, I'm going to take a chance, we're going to take her in, we're going to see if we can save her. They did. Some of those studies that I was looking at that the Allied forces acquired when they came across concentration camps and so forth, some of the information actually helped in understanding what the process was going on with her. It's kind of just an interesting thing to understand that, hypothermia across mammals, there are relations, and sometimes you can find some pretty helpful resources in some of the most unlikely places. Moving on to Tuesday. We don't really have a good name for her, so we're calling her Tuesday for short. This is a dry heifer. She is about 40 months old, so she was 36 months, obviously, when she went to calve, because we always have them calve a year later than most people. And now we're feeding her out. You can see the real flatness of the back end of her, getting real fat, and that's good. That'll help with the finishing. Interesting thing with her, she's dry. She was not originally noted as dry. She did have a calf in her last fall. Either she aborted or something occurred hormonally, or we don't know. But Dad has also indicated that something he's noticed in the past is that these ones that are kind of wily, they're kind of a little leery-eyed, that you want to make sure you have a side eye on them whenever you're out in the pasture. They tend to not breed up very well, and whether that's something genetically, something hormonally, or just plain personality, she was unable to provide a calf. And so we brought her in and we decided we are going to feed her out, and we as a family will consume her over the next year or so. She is very pushy. She is, quite frankly, kind of dangerous if you really get too involved with her. She's fine with you being around, but you don't want to really get in her business too much. Unlike this guy who enjoys food and being around everybody. Notice she's always facing me, trying to make sure she has me where she wants me to be. But she also recognizes I'm typically a food source at the end of the day. So there's that. As you can see here, we've got 4 steers in that little pen, and then another 4 here, which makes 8. And then of course our heifer 9, and then the burger heifer for 10. Those are our 10 animals for this year. But the situation surrounding these 2 specific heifers is just interesting, because one is cold injury related from calving season, and then one is actually, whether we know it or not, hormonal, genetic, whatever it might be. She's going to be our other source. Nothing wrong with her other than she can't produce a calf. You can see she looks pretty darn good. She's going to be obviously much heavier, because that's the difference between right there. That's 3 years old, 3.5, and about 2 years old. So that's the difference in meat. We will obviously be paying, when it comes to her, we'll be paying for all of it because it's ours. But if we were a consumer, we would be paying for bone growth as well with her. Whereas more people with this, our personal customers, like this guy's customer, will be paying more for meat than they will for bone, because that extra maturity just hasn't quite gotten there. And so you're going to end up paying a little bit less on the bone side that you're not really going to consume. Those are 2 really specific situations, dabbled in there with a little bit of our butcher process and feed out for when it comes to grain finishing beef for our customers every year. Hope you enjoyed that, at least a little bit of a understanding of some of the specific situations surrounding the cattle that we're feeding out and finishing for some of our customers. So thanks. Till you're better paid.